This is a lion pride. The average pride consists of about 15 lions, including several adult females and up to 4 males and their cubs. This structure is universal for all lions. But humans are unusual animals in this regard, and many other regards too. We form such a variety of social structures that it's hard to give a single description of them all. Even more, humans can think and theorize about the best ways to organize our society, which is why there exist wars, revolutions, and political crises, but also peace, prosperity, and progress. In the modern developed world, democracy is considered by most people to be the best way to govern a group of humans called a country. The idea is simple. Members of the group make decisions regarding the group as a whole. Usually they choose some other people to make decisions for them. This variant is called representative democracy. Most consider democracy to be almost synonymous with freedom. Nevertheless, there is a vocal minority of people who criticize democracy for its ineffectiveness. So, who's right? Let's take a look at the systematic flaws of democracy and what can we do about them. First argument against democracy: airplanes and populism. Imagine you're flying on an airplane. Who's getting a say in who's gonna be a pilot? Well, obviously, a pilot is a person with a special education and qualifications to do their job, probably appointed by their company. This particular pilot is also a pretty boring person and is afraid of public speeches. But it really doesn't matter. As long as they're doing their job properly, you probably won't even notice them. But now imagine that passengers have to choose a pilot by vote. Suddenly, a pilot has to appear before the airplane's people and explain to them why they are the best choice. But our pilot is too shy, remember? So they can't do that. Instead, there's this really loud and charismatic person. They know that most passengers would like to go to the tropical island paradise instead of the actual destination, and the candidate promises to deliver them to that place. Some of the passengers question whether or not this person even knows how to aviate, but nobody listens. After all, this person seems very nice and really cares about people and promises to make them all happy and rich. Are you against people being happy and rich? And the old pilot and a few of his allies can only watch with horror how the elected pilot and his people collect all the valuable things on board, while the airplane slowly loses its height. So, the first problem with democracy. In an election, sometimes a person's charisma matters more than their actual ability to govern. A dishonest individual can be elected only by promising things most people want, without actual intent to fulfill those promises. Maybe our new pilot prepared a parachute for themselves in advance. So let's fix this problem. Why don't we create some set of criteria to control who's getting into power? Second argument against democracy: horns and the majority's tyranny. The idea is simple. We need to prevent incompetent people from becoming elected by depriving them from the right to run for office. How do we decide which people are on? Democratically, of course. If the majority thinks something is wrong, it is wrong. Let's say that airplane's passengers don't like people with horns. They say that people with horns are greedy and crooked, so we shouldn't let them run for office, or even take part in the democratic process at all. Everybody is for? Great. One of the passengers suggests an even better idea. Why don't we just throw people with horns from the airplane? The problem is solved. Third argument against democracy: inefficiency. One of the crew members has found a problem in a plane's engine. It needs an urgent solution, or else the plane risks falling down. The crew member immediately tells the captain about it, but there's an exact protocol for actions in such a situation. Even more, the captain questions whether or not the decision to change the engine would be popular among the voters. There is a group of people who say that the founding engineers of the airplane didn't envision for an engine to be changed. Therefore, it shouldn't. So the crew has to go through the process of making sure that everyone on the plane is happy with the decision, instead of just solving an urgent problem. The fourth argument against democracy: the death of freedom. The airplane's people are tired of the incompetent, corrupt rulers they brought to power by believing in their populist promises, which is why they are searching for a leader who will promise to end this holiday of corruption. Nothing can go wrong, right? And here they have that person, the leader who sees the root of the problem. People have too much freedom. People are sheep and they need a shepherd. The leader is a savior and he will save them from themselves. A freedom is a slavery. The leader will bring much needed peace and stability with his iron fist. Airplane's people vote for the leader and he makes a decision that from now on, all candidates on public offices need to be approved by him personally, and every person's life will be monitored to detect inappropriate or dangerous behavior. No more freedom. So, to sum this up, democracy can bring incompetent people to power, elected by the electorate, which knows nothing about governing. Even more, if the majority thinks something is the right thing to do, the authorities can implement whatever inhumane policies they like. The thing is, every country on earth, with no exceptions, functions because of some restrictions on freedom. In most cases, though, these restrictions are viewed as necessary. Like, if you've done something bad, you'll be placed into a special institution which you can't leave, and live in not so pleasant conditions, giving up on almost everything in your life. We justify it by saying that these harsh punishments are only used on people who are really dangerous to the society. But the thing is, what counts as a crime and as a danger is determined only by the public opinion. At some point in history, pretty democratic countries like the US or Sweden placed people in jails for having sex with someone of another race or of the same gender. People were castrated and lobotomized if they were considered to have bad genes. In some cases, being mixed race was considered enough. Democracy is two coyotes and a lamb voting what to have for lunch. And may I add that democracy can also be its own and freedom's demise. Nazis were put in power in Germany by a democratic election, and under them, all kinds of cruelty were performed on various groups of people, like Jews, Romani, LGBT+ people, people with disabilities, people with mental illnesses, and people disagreeing with the Nazi regime. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of things that are now illicit and or judged by the society will be considered completely normal in the future. The most obvious example being the drug usage, as more and more countries decriminalize cannabis, but it is still illegal in a lot of pretty democratic countries. Now, as we know about the dangers of incompetent rulers whom democracy can bring to power, we have to do something about it. In reality, we don't vote for pilots, and it's probably a good thing. So, why don't we abolish voting altogether? We can create a whole class of people who will be trained to govern, maybe even from their young age, and selected according to their abilities. Something like pilots. So, let's check how a system with a sophisticated unelected ruling class deals with the problems of democracy. Well, turns out it's even worse. When the majority's rule can result in a majority's tyranny, a minority's rule can result in a minority's tyranny, which is arguably worse. The representative democracy is De facto, a minorities rule too, but in this case, the minority is at least held accountable by the majority. The stability of a political system is determined by a lot of factors. The questions we need to answer are: how well does the system deal with opposition? Does it offer social mobility and the inflow of new minds and ideas into the government? If the ruling class becomes too isolated from reality and is unable to make a meaningful change, and the opposition has no way of legally influencing the policy, the social tension rises. Let's quote one of the organizers of one of the biggest and deadliest revolutions of our time, Vladimir Lenin. What, generally speaking, are the symptoms of a revolutionary situation? First, when it is impossible for the ruling classes to maintain their rule without any change, when there is a crisis. For a revolution to take place, it is usually insufficient for the lower classes not to want to live in the old way. It is also necessary that the upper classes should be unable to live in the old way. Second, when the suffering of the oppressed classes have grown more acute than usual. Third, when, as a consequence of the above causes, there is a considerable increase in the activity of the masses, who uncomplainingly allow themselves to be robbed in peacetime, but in turbulent times are drawn both by all the circumstances of the crisis and by the upper classes themselves into independent historical action. Basically, if the tensions rise too high and the government is unable to do anything about it, the system collapses. And here's where democracy has its star moment. The best thing about democracy when it comes to stability, the dealing with opposition, is embedded in democracy itself. Non-elective systems do not have an effective way to deal with opposition, which also makes them less stable in the long run, when there occurs a conflict between the ruling party and the powerful opposing party, and the conflict explodes in the revolution. And at the same time, democracy is also better at making sure that the ruling class doesn't become too isolated from the people. It still happens, but it's less likely to happen, as the ruling class has to consistently appeal to its voters. Therefore, democracy is also better at preventing the majority of the population from being oppressed, as the majority chooses the ruling class. Which is not a guarantee, of course, as we can see in a lot of examples throughout history, but it is much better than non-elective systems at doing so. And while democracies can be less stable in the short term, they are much more stable in the long run. Democracy can be slower at making decisions, but those decisions have more guarantees of being balanced. It is true that non-elective systems can be sometimes really quick at making decisions, but those decisions do not have any guarantees of being effective. Quickness isn't always equal to effectiveness. Let's take a look at some data and let numbers speak for themselves. Most countries in the world are ranked by the level of democracy in the Democracy Index. The index categorizes each country into one of the four regime types: full democracy, flawed democracy, hybrid regime, and authoritarian regime. So, I have decided to calculate some other important indicators for each of the regime types. The peace index, that measures the level of stability and, well, peacefulness of the country, shows a clear correlation between the level of democracy and the level of stability of the country. The Human Development Index, that combines the indicators of life expectancy, education, and economy, shows exactly the same correlation. However, for the final index I've chosen for this task, the result is much more interesting. This index is called the Gini index, and it measures financial inequality. Full democracies still perform the best, but authoritarian regimes come only second last, with flawed democracies taking the last place. I do have some ideas explaining this result, but they are too long, so I'll just show them on the screen and you can pause if you wish. My calculations will be linked in the description, so you can check them too. In the end, we can conclude that while democracy isn't synonymous with freedom, they do correlate, and the benefits of the democratic system are seen the most in the long term. But what can we do about those arguments against democracy? Can we make the democratic system better? Yes, we can. We can prevent incompetent and dangerous persons from becoming elected by educating ourselves. Read about the candidates, check their policies, use critical thinking and reliable sources, and educate people around you. And vote. Your vote does matter. When it comes to preventing the majority's tyranny, the answer is empathy. No discrimination should come unchecked. Question your assumptions about minorities. Sometimes we don't even notice how our actions can harm other people, or become extremely defensive when pointed at it. Democracy, as flawed as it is worth protecting because other systems are even more flawed. I would like to finish this video with the words of the British Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill. Democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. Stay free. If you've managed to go this far into the video, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing it with others, and commenting. It would mean the world to me. Thank you so much for viewing my work.
Well, we aren't the first people to come up with this idea. In 375 BC, Greek philosopher named Plato argued for creation of the wise ruling class of philosophers who will be taking children from the families and raising them according to its child's abilities and to the high morals.